Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Cleve True of the Clear Vision of Truth. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with an insider for Swissindo, Mr. Peter Van Runt, who has agreed to tell us his very interesting story about his involvement in the Swissindo project. Peter, are you there?
Yep, sure am, Cleve, and thanks for having me, and thanks for having this conversation with me and sharing it with the people out there. I don't know that my story is that interesting, but for people who are curious about Swissindo, I think it might be, and I'd like to offer my perspective on that, and I'm glad that you're helping me to get that out there.
Yes, well, I do think it is interesting. I mean, Swissindo has been at least a minor, maybe a major phenomenon on the internet. It is not so much so in the mainstream media, but there's been a lot of interest, maybe millions of hits, if not tens of millions of hits, generated by various videos about Swissindo. So I think there will be a lot of interest. So if you don't mind, I'll just start right in.
Yeah, sure.
And my first question is, maybe, Peter, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Not all that much interesting there. I'm in my mid-50s. I live in Canberra, Australia. I was born in Adelaide back in the very early 60s, and I grew up in the Netherlands. My parents were immigrants who went back when I was a little kid. So I was raised and educated in the Netherlands, did my college in the Netherlands, history and economics, was very much involved in the music scene and the alternative scenes and the protest scenes, the anti-nuke scenes, was always a social and political activist and involved in trying to better the situation somewhat. And there was a lot of optimism in those years amongst the young people that we were going to make some real changes. And I guess this for the story later on is kind of important, I guess, that I always had experiences that were extraordinary in terms of perceptions that I had that nobody else had around me that I couldn't talk about, which were just spiritual experiences, really, experiences of oneness, experiences of nature that I couldn't relate, nor did anybody else relate it to me. They were my own experiences that were something like what some of the spiritual people were describing, but not quite. So I was always looking for the meaning for that. And that's something that goes on to this day. I'm not looking for the meaning because I've stopped looking for the meaning, but it's important for how the story is going to go down later on that's understood. And I was into music. I came back to Australia in my mid-20s, so I've sort of been half European, half Australian, and worked in the music industry, and then ended up, of course, making $1 million in the music industry is really easy. You just invest $2 million, and so I ended up working in alternative medicine, working as a counsellor, trained as a counsellor in a holistic detox centre. So always trying to, work with people and work with human consciousness and the human experience. And ended up working in the IT industry, running a retail store, ending up owning that retail store or co-owning it in a partnership, and worked for a number of years as a IT consultant, on-site consultant for small to medium enterprise, and retired pretty much. Retired just before 2030, so just before 2012, at the end of 2011 I retired. Because basically, none of the things in life were giving me the answers I was seeking, and that's where really, a few things happened to me that sort of put me on the path towards Swissindo. So, there's to me, there's nothing very special about my story or anything like that. It's just I'm not any particular genius or wasn't recruited into Swissindo for any particular being a business tycoon or a economic genius or a professional lawyer or.
Sorry to interrupt, Peter. It's just that there's some keys or something that. Or a noise of jiggling or something that's,
okay, that's my, sorry, I do apologize for that. That's my, my headphone, cord. So let me just rearrange that. And, then it won't be noisy anymore. There we go. Sorry about that. So, where were we? Okay, so that's it.
You basically, were an open-minded, spiritually aware and, searching sort of person. Who, from the sound of it, had a certain amount of a comfortable financial situation, and were really ready to find something that would sort of interest you at a deeper level. And so, how did you get actually led towards Swissindo?
Well, it's kind of one of those funny things. So these what do you want to call it? Satori's, as they say in the Zen, these moments of awareness, kept happening. And, I wasn't that financially nice most of my life. I was in the music industry kicking around and doing little gigs and, engineering and spending more than I was earning. And, I was never really interested in money because I was interested in other things, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And then, when I started working in IT, I really started to get interested in money because nothing else had kind of delivered the goods. So I thought I might as well just devote my time to actually, being a little bit of a success and making some money and setting up a business and getting, I'm starting a family. Got to get serious about it. So, and I suppose when I made that money, it didn't give me what I wanted either. There was no satisfaction there for me. Some satisfaction, sure, of, being efficient, running a business, being smart, being upright in business, being an honest businessman and working on old-fashioned, giving people service for their value for their money and working more on relationships than deals, which to me business is. It's working on relationships. Good relationships is good business. But anyway, I'm diverting. So I kind of quit working because I could. And, my wife had a good, long-term, high-level, public service career. So, we were okay. We could do it. We could stop pretty early. Mm-hmm. And then I got into this void of having all this time. And I used to drop my daughter off at school in the morning and I used to go and sit in the park and observe nature, because there was something that always from childhood I felt something wasn't right and these experiences are trying to tell me something. So I was just kind of trying to be quiet and observe nature and kind of work out who the hell I was and what the hell was going on. And I was sitting in the park one day and I had this enormous satori and I saw myself as everything and I saw everything as myself. And there was just no center to me. There was no me. There was just everything as one. Mm-hmm. And that hit me and that stayed with me for a long, long time. And I felt amazingly peaceful and loving and connected to everything. And it was an amazing feeling. Mm-hmm. And I'd had those moments before, but they never lasted that long. So I started sitting in the park, contemplating and, watching nature and thinking about human nature and thinking about conditioning and thinking about life. And I started making some videos about my insights to try and share it because I was trying to give it meaning by sharing it around. It must have happened to me so I could share it around with people and then everybody can wake up kind of thing to who they really are and be blissful and be happy and, all that sort of stuff. And so I was in that kind of a frame of mind where something had fundamentally really shifted in my perception of life. And I was looking for meaning for that. And then, lo and behold, I came across the OPPT, and I'm not sure if people are still aware of what the OPPT was, but it was the One People's Public Trust, and it was started by Heather Tucci-Jarrett and what's the other guy called? I can't remember his name.
Brian Kelly, maybe.
Yeah, Brian Kelly was the guy who publicised it. Him and Lisa Harrison, they had a radio show called The Collective Imagination, and they began to feature Heather Tucci and Jarrett. Mm-hmm. And all the things that I was seeing spiritually, it was so synchronistic with what Heather was presenting. And Heather was a lawyer who'd had a bit of an epiphany and decided to expose as much of the hidden systems of corporate world and government and creation of money and as she could. She wanted to expose that, and she allegedly did these UCC filings, and I'm not sure if you're aware of what the UCC is, which is...
Yeah, I'm a bit of a skeptic on that, but, I think a short description of what they were trying to achieve is quite helpful, I think, in leading to Swissindo, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because that's basically what Swissindo is backing up on. So Heather was gaining traction with this idea that the Uniform Commercial Code was the actual law of the planet, because all our governments were corporations, basically. That somehow the natural government had been usurped by a corporate government, and there is a lot of evidence that suggests that that is indeed the case, that something had gone on, that organic people's government had been replaced by a corporate entity. But anyway, people can research that. So in short, the OPPT showed us a lot of things behind the scenes, but Heather came from a spiritual perspective, and she certainly was a person who was intuitive and had some insights in that direction, and I resonated with her quite strongly. There's that New Age term, resonation, which I now really hate, actually. But anyway, let me not... Yeah. So, but I did fire on that, what she was saying, and... so Heather had created this One People's Public Trust, and she had created these filings, basically accusing all the corporations of having set up a slavery system, by slavery system by proxy, via the monetary and corporate system, had enslaved and basically stolen from the people for hundreds of years. And the UCC is supposed to be a forum whereby corporate entities settle their differences. Mm-hmm. And she had made these filings claiming that they were operating an illegal slavery system. And her explanation of things, and the explanation of that whole OPPT bubble, was that because Heather made these filings, and none of the other parties came forward and rebutted those filings, that therefore they had admitted guilt by non-rebuttal.
Which, I do find that a bit of a bizarre concept, but I do remember at the time maybe debating with people, whether you can actually make law by stating something and then assuming you've changed the law if the party you referred to in your statement refuses to rebut it. I mean, the whole world would be busy making these kind of statements and rebutting them all day long. If that could work. Yeah.
It's true though, but in law it does work like that. If there is a legitimate court case and the other party does not show up and does not rebut, but then there's still a court case and there's still a judge who has to say, well, that party has not rebutted, therefore I vote in favour of the plaintiff. Or I rule in favour of the plaintiff. So even though Heather made these filings, and whoever received those filings in the UCC must have gone, oh God, crackpot, and crumbled them up and thrown them in the bin. But so the story was that the filings had not been rebutted. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it stood in law that all corporations on the planet were foreclosed, including all governments who were corporate entities. And that therefore she had claimed all goods, possessions, services, monies back for the people, and she had created the One People's Public Trust to hold all those assets of the world in trust, so that she could redistribute a fair share to every person on the planet, and that fair share was then deemed to be $12 billion in damages, basically. She was going to get damages from all the corporations, foreclose all the corporations,
Yeah, I'd like to maybe just make a footnote to take up with you the idea of wealth on the planet, maybe in a subsequent talk, because I think that's an interesting subject.
Yeah.
And it probably would have, a little more research at that time might have come up with a very different number if people had done it. But anyway, I don't want to interrupt the flow of the story here.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, I know it's long-winded, but for people who haven't heard about the OPPT, it's kind of essential. That's how I got there. Mm-hmm. So I'm having my little spiritual awakening. She's having a little lawyer spiritual awakening, and I'm thinking she's sort of trying to write into law the spiritual stuff that I'm becoming aware of, the oneness of everything, that, no one can lord it over another because everything is equal. The same life is in everything. Mm-hmm. And so I got really interested in her because she was trying to put that in law, and I thought she'd actually succeeded in putting that in law. And this was the fabled 2012, where everything would change according to the Mayan calendar, all the prophecies, and and her first filings went in December 2012, and it was all this synchronicity because I'd had this spiritual awakening, and this all was happening synchronistic with it. And why had I found it? Must have been for a reason, because I was still looking for a reason for the Satori, so to speak. And which I'm not now, I can tell you that. But so long story short, Heather had made these filings, created the trust, and the story was that the trust had no funds in it, and people were trying to claim on it, so she had to close the trust. Mm-hmm. And the story that I was given later was that Mr. Sino, or Sugi, or whatever he calls himself nowadays, Mr. Sino had stepped up as being the leader of the cabal, the M1, the monetary one, and we'll talk about that in a minute, how that supposedly and allegedly came about. Mm-hmm. He, as the head of the cabal, had gone to Heather and said, I'm not rebutting on behalf of all the corporations, which I own because I'm the M1, I accept liability. But
Peter, sorry to interrupt, can you say a little bit about what sort of involvement or contact you had with Sino at that stage?
Okay, at that stage I had no contact with Sino. I was just following the OPPT. We were glued to the radio show every week and in the chat forums, and then one day Brian Kelly comes on the show and says, I've been approached by this Mr. Sino, who is the M1, he's the King of Kings, he owns everything, and he's accepted he's accepted liabilities to Heather's charge, and he wants to make restitution. Brian was appointed as Swissindo's press release manager, and he was going to be given the codes any moment to activate the military, because Sino claims to have the codes to activate all the militaries of the world, put them under his command, and he just needed to have the payments released so he could put them under their command and pay them, because they are soldiers, they work for money. And so Brian was going to, do all the press releases and get the provost marshal going, and my first instinct was, hang on a minute, we're trying to get rid of hierarchy here, of hierarchical systems, hierarchical religions, hierarchical governance. Well, I don't want no stinking King of Kings, was pretty much what I typed in the chat that day. This is bullshit. I don't want this. This is crap. This is exactly the opposite of what Heather's been saying. Mm-hmm. And so I was quite, against it the first time I heard it.
Wasn't Heather later offered the title of Queen of Africa or something?
Empress, yes.
Empress of Africa.
Yeah.
So, but that came sometime later when a split started to develop, and they were trying to bring her back into the fold, I think.
Yeah, she was never in the fold. She was never convinced of Sino.
What did you know of Sino at that point? I mean, this guy suddenly appears on the scene and claims to have. Okay. So
absolutely nothing.
He was a moving target. He sort of appeared and made rather outrageous claims, but somehow people were so interested in finding someone to fund this stream that when he stepped forward, it was very convenient in terms of the timing.
Yeah, it was very convenient in terms of the timing, and I will get back to what I think about that as well, but I'll just try and stay on track with the timeline, the etiology of it all. So Sino comes on the scene. I rejected that out of hand, and by that time, when I was researching the OPPT, I found Ron Van Dyke on YouTube. And Ron Van Dyke was doing videos about the OPPT and about spiritual stuff and about changing the world, and he invited me to do a weekly segment on his YouTube channel and talking about spirituality and conditioning and human consciousness and spirituality, and I thought, well, I had this Satori, I wanted meaning, I wanted to share it, so Ron was a good opportunity with, 5,000 views of video. I'll go in there and do some talks, and he's a nice guy. Mm-hmm. And so he did a video called The OPPT May Have Found Its Enforcement. And he was all in favour of this, because if we could enforce the filings, then, we could really change the situation in the world. And, if all the corporations and the governments had been foreclosed, they were legal entities, and we could remove them legally and lawfully, I should say. Mm-hmm. And, he thought this was a really good thing if Sugi could mobilise the military. And he started me wondering about that anyway, getting curious about it. But there still wasn't very much information about Mr. Sugi that I could find, or Mr. Sino that I could find, or Swissindo, bar a few cryptic videos in very broken English by a few, by Mr. Rahajo, which is one of Sino's sort of senior guys. Mm-hmm. And his English is pretty bad, so there was this 45-minute video on YouTube that was in such bad English that I just could not understand it. Something about huge sums of money and all that sort of stuff. And there were some Indonesian language videos, which, I obviously don't speak. So there was very little to be found. And then I came across who was later to be my boss and the Emperor of Australia, and I'll just call him Ross, as simple as. I don't need to have a reference point there, because he is a pivotal figure in all of this, for me anyway.
Who is this guy, Peter?
Okay, yeah.
Do you want to his name and a little bit about it?
I'll just call him Ross, right? Mm-hmm. And Ross first became aware of Swissindo by himself from his own research into the whole ideas of the collateral accounts, the gold caches throughout Asia. He was actually living in the Philippines at the time himself, and he was very interested in that history. And so he was looking through that history, and he came across Swissindo, and he contacted them. So he was the first Westerner to effectively contact Swissindo. Although not Mr. Sino directly, but other people in the organisation, if you can term it an organisation, but I'll get to that as well. So Ross was there as the first Western person to really get in touch with them. And then meantime, over in the North Americas, Desmond and Paula, Desmond Grundy and I can't remember Paula's last name anyway. He was very vocal within the OPPT movement. He did a lot of videos, and they came across Mr. Sino, and they spoke to him at length over the phone, and they came up with the idea of, and he wanted help to, secure these, the release of these accounts, and they came up with the idea of forming delegations across the world to pressure institutions and governments into giving Mr. Sino his legitimate access to his legitimate accounts, and for all of this to come forward. And in order to further that, they were working with an organization called OMD, which is Organisation Mondiale Développement, which is a French organization that is I'm not sure whether it was tier 1, 2 or 3 United Nations consultative organization that has extensive projects, apparently, according to them, in the third world. Mm-hmm. And Desmond and Paul came up with the idea of starting the delegations. And so Sino agreed to that, and he charged Ross with the setting up of the Australian delegation. OMD were going to be the European delegation, their headquarters being in Paris. And Desmond and Paula were setting up the Americas, and Ross had recruited somebody in South Africa to set up South African, and the Indonesians themselves had set up the Asian organization through something which was akin to OMD, but an Asian variety of it called MUN, and I've found very little on them, basically.
So just to try and understand Ross and his role here, did he see himself as someone who was running this and using Swissindo as his money box, or did he see himself as being somehow under Swissindo?
Well, he saw himself as he became aware of Swissindo, and he'd been researching collateral accounts in gold, and he's somebody who really had the interest of humanity at heart. Ross, to this day, I'll count myself lucky to have met him and to know him. He's a man of enormous integrity. So he's a good guy in all of this, I'll tell you. But like me, he was looking for a way to make this shithole a better place, basically, and that would be the kind of language that he uses. He's an amazing guy. Got a foul mouth on him, but boy, he's an amazing guy. And so, he'd come into that. He started setting up these delegations, and he was instructed by Sino because, this was supposed to be all on the back of the OPPT, and Sino had accepted liability for the charges that Heather had made under the public trust, and he had to go and recruit people who were OPPT savvy, who were active in the OPPT, who knew the filings, who knew the dynamics of it. And so that's what Ross set out to do. He recruited a whole bunch of OPPT people, mainly via Facebook, really, and other social media. And
sorry to interrupt again, but this was really voluntary effort at this point?
Yeah, it's all been voluntary. So,
so no one was paid anything at this stage?
Nobody was paid anything. No, we were doing this because obviously the story was that the accounts haven't been released. Mr. Sino doesn't have, 2 red cents to rub together because the accounts are not released. Mm-hmm. And, we have to secure the release of the accounts before there can be any payments to anyone. And apart from that, if we were going to be, these liberators of servants of humanity, then, why should we get paid first? We should get paid last, because the money belongs to the people and has to be returned to the people. All that sort of stuff was going on.
I might be jumping ahead of the story here, in which case you can put me off, but, we did talk about this a little bit earlier today, and I think at some point, I think it would be good if you could sort of outline the claims, the financial claims that the Swissindo made for its wealth, and also why people were inclined to believe them. But if I'm getting ahead of you, then just put this off and come into it a bit later.
No, that's okay. We can actually address that. So we're at where Ross and Paulo and Desmond are starting the recruiting. So what we are, and it actually ties in quite well, actually. So what we were being told when we were recruited, and I'll just pick up my story from here, because that actually will tie in nice too. So I'm sort of pro-OPPT and anti-hierarchy, as per what Heather and myself had seen on a spiritual level, let's put it that way. And I'm on Facebook, and Ross made a comment about Mr. Sugi and Swissindo on Ron Van Dyke's Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And I responded by saying, I don't want no shit stinking hierarchical king. You know, I kind of went off a little bit. And so Ross and I started an argument between us on Ron Van Dyke's page. And then one day, and we were sort of to and froing for a few days on Ron Van Dyke's page. And one day Ross just said, listen, why are we polluting Ron's page with our little, discussion? Why don't you just friend me and we'll talk directly? And I thought, that's for somebody that I've just had a real sort